Well, my YouTube analytics tells me that my channel is on a boom at the moment, just as much watch time and views as I've ever got at the moment, so it's time to strike when the iron is hot. So what am I exactly doing? Well, my next 3 videos are all going to be my worst performing series, talking about a league, the top league for a sport, that is only played, really, and only well known in one country.
Sometimes my genius it's almost frightening.
G'day Internet, my name is Lorenzo Di-Mauro, and if you can believe it, tomorrow, that is the day after I am recording and publishing this video, we'll be seeing the first game of the 2024 AFL Premiership season. The Melbourne Demons go to Sydney to play the Sydney Swans at the SCG on a Thursday night to begin the season. It's come around very quickly and it promises to be quite the season. It is looking to be one of the most open and competitive and unpredictable seasons we have had since, well, the last 3 or 4 to be fair. So that means that the fixture for the competition, as always, is seemingly being discussed right around football circles. So today what I thought I would do is take a look at this. And as the title and thumbnail has suggested, this video is not going the way you might have expected. These are the problems with the AFL fixture that no one talks about. And the reason why I'm talking about them and not the others is because I would argue the others aren't really problems. Specifically, the bye rounds. Not the greatest setup, and I'll get to that in a second, what might be a little better, but honestly, it's not as bad of a problem as people make it out to be. Of course, in 2024, we're seeing the opening ever edition of Opening Round! And a lot of people don't like this. I really do. I think this will be a successful system. It's not with the format I would have gone for. With games in New South Wales and Queensland, I would have played, as I explained on my Twitter account, 5 games in this first weekend, 4 in the second in a split round, and then do that again in the midpoint of the season as the solution to the bye problem that I discussed a moment ago. Also not the double matchups. These are an essential part of the system. Is it very well thought out? No, and I'll get to that in a moment, but the concept of the double matchups isn't, and I think 23 games is the perfect length for an AFL season at this time. And the last thing you might mention, maybe we talked about it last season a lot, AFL fans, was Gather Round. It was a good concept, it was always going to work, and Opening Round will prove, just like with Gather Round, that the AFL, despite its many, and I mean many faults, it's better at running a professional sporting competition than random unanimous flogs on Twitter. So today I'm going to be taking a look and making a lot of people angry, I suspect, regarding my proposals for change for the AFL fixture. So it is a controversial area, but to be honest, I don't mind, because after I have got my social media accounts in November, December 2023, quite frankly, the response has been, well, it's been widely accepting. Okay, maybe it hasn't been widely, but I mean, half that stuff's on Twitter. Everything gets people riled up on Twitter, and no matter how much Elon Musk tries his very, very best, Twitter will never be this place, or X as he insists on it. Twitter will never be the place that is a free speech haven, the town hall. Twitter will forever be the internet equivalent of this.
A bizarre altercation between 2 women at Venice Beach had onlookers doing a double take on Monday afternoon. One of them completely naked, swinging what looks like a baseball bat with spikes on one end. Are they baseball bats?
Baseball bats or sticks or something.
Watch as the woman wearing jeans and a tank top pulls out her own bat from behind the trash can before the two get into what you might call the strangest fencing match you've ever seen.
What was I talking about again? Oh, right, AFL fixture reform. I better get to that because I don't have much time left on this. I'm running out of space on this phone. I do need to get a new one. Right, let's start off with, I would argue, the biggest problem with the AFL fixture, and it's one you aren't thinking of because it's the lack of a concept and really unevenness of home and away. AFL.com.au put out a rare gem of a video discussing the fixture and how it's put together, and they mentioned something in the video, and that was:
the AFL is made up of 18 teams. Each team will play 23 games, 11 home games, 11 away games, and 1 game at Gather Round, which is an additional round where all games are played in the same state.
This is not really true. It's what they tried to do, but it's not really true. And here's what I mean. Now, spoiler alert, so it's just sort of a forewarning. What I'm about to do is I am going to use a definition of home and away that is not remotely used by anyone else, including me for the rest of this video, for this exercise, so bear with me. Here's what I did. Right after the AFL fixture dropped with the thinking of making this video in the future, I decided, here's what this exercise will entail. I looked at every time a team was listed as the home team and had a look at where they were playing. If they were playing at a ground most people would defensively describe as their home ground, whether they were considered home or away, I consider that as a home game. Really, this is better thought of as a home ground game, which is what I've dubbed it. The next thing I had a look at was times where they weren't at their home ground, but were still considered the home team. Now, if the opposition team was considered the home ground team in this case, that would not be considered a home game. But in a case where this wasn't the case, so to use an example, Carlton hosting St Kilda is not considered a home game for Carlton in this exercise, but Collingwood hosting West Coast is. So that means what I have done is basically looking at every time you play at your home game, plus other times where you basically have a home ground advantage, or some sort of, you're the hosting team, another team is travelling in. And if we look at the results, it's not really that surprising. Collingwood's right up there at the top, as there's plenty of big Melbourne clubs. Carlton play too much at Docklands for mine. I know that's a contract thing, I don't like it. They really should be playing more games at the MCG. And then you get to those 4 rugby states teams, which are all playing in their own venues, and Geelong, predictably, my beloved Cats, right there at the bottom. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the same thing I did, but I'm just going to remove gather round. So basically, I'm going to redo the 2023 fixture, but I'm going to take out the newest edition, the 23rd game that was introduced in 2023. And this is probably what you expected. The 9 Melbourne teams are the top 9. The 9 non-Melbourne teams are 10th to 18th. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about Vic bias. It's not really Vic bias. What, you think the Western Bulldogs and St Kilda are getting an advantage? Give me a break. And it's obviously not Geelong either. It's the big Melbourne clubs, the big 4, throw in Melbourne and Hawthorn on occasions as well. So you can complain all you want about how other teams get more money. This is the real advantage. And yes, I'm fully aware that, for example, Essendon and Collingwood Anzac Day, they cancel each other out. It's not necessarily a home game for either team, as much, well, a home ground game for either team. It's basically a home game for both teams. And while this doesn't matter for that particular game, you know what does matter? The Premiership. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. It's all about winning the Premiership. And you cannot say that Collingwood or any other of the big Melbourne clubs playing all these games of the MCG, plus the bucket load of finals, plus every single grand final, COVID notwithstanding, that they participate in, no matter where they finish on the ladder, that is plainly ridiculous. You could finish a big Melbourne club 8th and play other Victorian teams at the MCG, so basically home finals, in your elimination final, in your semi-final, in your preliminary final, and then you get to the grand final and you get a home game against, say, the best team all year, which might have been a non-Victorian club, so you've basically gotten 4 home games. This is the problem with the AFL fixture, the biggest for mine. Now, the solution, obviously, you'd love everyone to play in their individual stadium. That's not happening. And to be fair, Carlton, Collingwood, and all these big historic Melbourne rivalries do deserve to be played in front of the big crowds of the MCG. So here is my proposal. If we're going to live under the assumption of 11 home games, 11 away games, and 1 game for gather round, then we are going to live by that statement. So, you play 11 games at your home ground. It doesn't matter whether you're considered home team or the away team. That's your 11 games at that ground. And then what is going to happen for those other home games? So Collingwood, as you can see by the graph, will have 3 games outstanding. Well, those games will be played somewhere else. Docklands, out in country areas, which deserve a few games. Obviously Tasmania, Canberra, the Northern Territory, maybe overseas. That is how we're going to get the fairest possible fixture from the home and away standpoint, and actually make it make sense. 11 home games, 11 away games, 1 game for gather round, that is what it is. And it goes for you too, Adelaide clubs. Sure, it's not as big of an advantage as Collingwood, but you can't say that the additional gather round game hasn't helped you. Adelaide basically got all the home games to start its season and still missed out on the finals. I see. Anyway, what I will say, though, is that for those Adelaide teams, they would play 2 home games, not at the Adelaide Oval, to compensate for the fact they're playing 1 game at gather round and the away showdown. Now, this is not the only problem I have with home and away, because as is clear with anyone who looks at the AFL fixture often, how does the AFL decide whether you play home or away? And this leads to my next sort of overarching theme of no formula. The NFL is the standard for this. They have a very clear, defined, the Wikipedia page is amazing. You can read through it. They have a clear formula of who you play and where. The AFL has nothing of the sort. Basically, anyone can play in any order at any time. So, to make this a little bit easier, here is what I propose. For the first 18 games of the season, you should play every team once and a rivalry game for the second time. Maybe play it all in the one round, a sort of rivalry round of sorts. But we do actually occasionally see every now and again where you get 6 or 7 genuine rivalry games. So what I did was, and this was a while ago, before I really locked in the idea of doing a YouTube channel, was I tried to create an Excel spreadsheet that would sort of document this. Now it's terrible, and it ended up just being putting teams into 2 groups, basically. And it's really complicated and hard to read, and I don't even like it. But it's a starting point. 1 year, you will play a team in the first 18 weeks of the season at home, and then the next year you would play them away, or vice versa. This would prevent the situation like we have at the moment with, say, Geelong and North Melbourne, with the last 3 seasons, North Melbourne all having to travel to Geelong 2024, 2023, and 2022. Factor in the fact that Geelong only clashes their jumper, that is, with North Melbourne, and Geelong haven't won a Blue Blaze jumper since the 2022 game the two teams played down in Tasmania. The lack of formula is also clear through the double matchups. Now, the AFL do normally have a formula to decide this.
These double matchups are governed by what we call the weighted rule. Once the finals conclude in a season, each team's finishing position will determine who they play in their double matchups the following season. For that reason, no versions of the fixture can be built until the day after the grand final. The final ladder is divided into thirds: the top 6, middle 6 and bottom 6. Based on finishing position, each team will play 2 to 3 double matchup games against teams in the same grouping, and 1 to 2 games against teams in the alternate 2 groupings.
But it's not exactly very good, so I'm not 100% sure how I would completely fix this, but obviously the double matchup might be one thing. You may even play your gather round opponent 3 times, once in Adelaide, once home, once away. That's not great for the teams that have to play the Crows or Port or whoever is hosting gather round, but it may be the best we've got. And then you would decide things based on ladder position, which is sort of what the NFL works with. You can also try and make it an even amount of Victorian teams, non-Victorian teams, Melbourne teams, non-Victorian teams, that sort of thing. I have one more complaint, and it's to do with the final series. Not the formula itself. The Crawford Final 8 is just about the best system we've had. The McIntyre Final 5 only maybe slightly better. But a problem I do have is with the host venues for finals and the time slots for preliminary finals. As a Geelong Cat supporter, it is infuriating every time we get to a home final and we don't actually get to play it in our home city. And I don't care what Caroline Wilson or Eddie Maguire says with some sort of historical geographical revisionism. These two towns are ages apart. Geelong deserves to play home games down in Geelong, 11 of them, and every home final, all the way through to the preliminary final. Same with teams like St Kilda, North Melbourne, Western Bulldogs. I don't care if they're playing a Collingwood or a Richmond. They earn that spot through the last 6 months of football. They deserve to get a home final if they have gotten themselves into that position. Another thing which infuriated me last year was the fact that the Collingwood GWS preliminary final was played on a Friday night. If you look at the NRL since 2012, where they have used this same system, every single year they've ensured the semi-final winners get a 7-day break. If that means the first place team is playing on the second game on the Saturday, that doesn't matter because they actually care about fixture fairness. The AFL clearly does not. It was ridiculous to give GWS that short 6-day break. And yes, Collingwood fans, it was ridiculous with a 6-day break against Richmond. That West Coast Melbourne preliminary final should have been the Friday night, and then a Saturday Twilight MCG qualifying final for Richmond and Collingwood. 2 wrongs do not make a right. So, I hope all of this has made sense. Of course, if there are any questions, please let me know. So these are sort of the overarching themes. First and foremost, you need to play 11 games in your actual home ground over the course of your season. Number 2, you need to alternate in the first 18 weeks of the season, home and away, between teams. Maybe 19 games, maybe play that if you're factoring in gather rounds. Don't count gather round for that spreadsheet. That gather round game is not factored in to that. So maybe over the first 19 games you use a similar formula to the Excel spreadsheet that I poorly made up. And number 3, the finals should be played at the home ground and should be played in sensible time slots. And I would even throw in the grand final. It's not the easiest decision. The MCG does a great job hosting it, but to be honest, after Collingwood's 2023 victory, which was, to be fair, they were minor premiers at the end of the home away season, I just thought to myself, you know, if it was played in Brisbane and Brisbane had got to first, they would have deserved that spot to play the grand final in Brisbane. I honestly believe that we have stadiums that are good enough to host grand finals. The only ones that really aren't are Metricon Stadium and, it's not Metricon anymore, it's Heritage Bank, Carrara, and the Sydney Showgrounds Giant Stadium, though I do think both those stadiums could be upgraded, and I think there have been some plans that have never actually gone through to potentially lift those towards around 30,000-ish, maybe more capacity, to ensure those stadiums are a bit bigger. And if they were to do that, then absolutely they should be hosting finals and grand finals. It's ridiculous to think GWS have been hosting more finals since 2012 than Geelong, because basically Geelong have been forced to play at the MCG, with the one exception being that qualifying final loss to Fremantle, because of the very silly deal the MCC and the AFL has just to ensure that those games are played at the MCG, those finals matchups. So I think that's just about all I've got. Thank you very much for watching, and if there are any questions, please do leave them down below. I also acknowledge the fact that, given the fact that we're going to 19 and 20 teams, some of this stuff becomes a little less redundant, particularly the double matchups, which will become less of a problem given the fact that we have less double matchups to have. But honestly, the people who do the AFL fixture have a very tough job. They don't really have a say in how it's designed. They just basically have to follow what the big wigs say. And I would honestly want to make their job a little bit easier. Well, that's all I got just about. Thank you very much for watching this The Case For video, and I will be back shortly.